Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron. We declare the game's Odyssey open.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Games Odyssey podcast, your home for stories of glory from Olympia to now. I'm Jonathan Jordan, and today is not a typical episode for us. I'm actually by myself. Sarah was not able to join in because we're kind of doing this off script and not really in our plan. So she wasn't really able to join in, but she knows that I'm doing this episode, and I'm just going to fully admit up front that this won't be quite as cleanly researched or edited as a normal episode, because I do want to get it out quickly to everyone. We've talked before about doing country profiles as part of the show, and with recent events, I felt pretty strongly that I needed to go ahead and make our first country profile to be about Ukraine. Now, we don't normally cover current events here because we're a history podcast, but sometimes when history is literally happening, you can't ignore it, and it's important to talk about it. That being said, this probably isn't one to listen to with younger kids, depending on how much you've talked to them about the war in Ukraine. And, the country's just been on our minds and our hearts over these past few weeks that the war has been going on. I feel like this is just a very small way that our little show can give some support to them and just raise awareness for them as a people. Also, before we get too much further, just to note this, I think it's really important to remember that there's no such thing as a perfect country. Every nation has a history full of mistakes and wrongdoing. The U.S. certainly isn't perfect, so this episode doesn't exist to vilify the people of Russia, many of whom are against this war and have even spoken out against it at the risk to their own safety and lives, and many of them who are just being lied to about this war by their government. Sarah and I were texting about this the other day, and something that she brought up was we don't know the full extent of the propaganda that's being shared over there and what people are being led to believe. So I think we need to keep that in perspective. So throughout this episode, anytime that I reference Russia or the Soviet Union, I'm referring to those in power, the government, the leaders, not the Russian people themselves. But with that said, let's talk about Ukraine, a little bit about their history, their involvement in the games, and some of their athletes that I want to highlight. Now, I'm not going to do a full history on Ukraine because that could be its own podcast, and I'm going to really just kind of give a summary of things, but I would encourage everyone to go check out the Holodomor episode of the podcast Stuff You Missed in History Class. Don't worry. I will have that posted in our show notes so that you can get to it easily. But it's a great podcast. They cover a lot of really interesting topics on there, and they just recently did this episode on the Holodomor, which was a period of terrible famine in Ukraine that was caused primarily by Soviet policies, the Ukrainian people being taken advantage of, the Soviet government taking advantage of Ukraine's resources. And so I think they do a way better job than I could ever do of concisely summarizing the history of Ukraine as a nation and explaining some of the background for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which predates Vladimir Putin. It's been going on for a long time, and they do a good job of explaining some of that background. So again, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, I'll have it in the show notes. Go give that a listen. Now, you probably already know this if you have been following current events, but Ukraine is located in Eastern Europe. It is the second largest country in Europe after Russia, though Russia, as you know, crosses over into Asia as well. The Dnieper River runs through Ukraine, and Kiev, its capital, is located there on the river in north-central Ukraine. The Ukrainian people themselves are Slavic in origin, so their language, which, by the way, they do have a unique language called Ukrainian. I think a lot of times it's easy to think that all previously Soviet nations just speak Russian, and that's not true. They do have their own distinct language, but it is written in the form of the Cyrillic alphabet, just like Russian. So it is a branch of the various Slavic languages. The area of modern-day Ukraine has always been an important trade route and a connecting point for the Mediterranean world to the northeastern part of Europe. In fact, Ukraine comes from a Slavic word for borderlands, which is why there's sometimes some confusion over whether you call it the Ukraine or just Ukraine. It comes from that translation referring to the borderlands, but as a nation, we refer to it as simply Ukraine. In short, the area has really fallen under the control of various groups throughout history. They experienced a brief period of independence from 1918 to 1920, but even then, parts of Western Ukraine were controlled and ruled by Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia during the time there between World War I and World War II. So as we think of Ukraine as a nation with its current boundaries, that was really established after the fall of the Soviet Union, which of course we'll talk about here in a little bit. Now, one of the reasons Ukraine was so important to the Soviet Union is that it's an important agricultural center in Europe. In fact, it's literally known as the breadbasket of Europe. It has historic success in growing grain. In fact, you've probably been seeing lots of pictures of their flag everywhere, and Ukraine's flag is actually supposed to represent yellow fields of grain underneath a blue Ukrainian sky, which I think that's pretty cool. I really like it. But during the Soviet years, there was a policy of Russian in-migration, which means that the Soviet Union was purposefully moving Russian people into Ukraine, and Ukrainian out-migration. So they were purposely relocating Ukrainians out of the country and into other parts of the Soviet Union. So between that famine, the Holodomor, and between these policies, you saw a decline in the population of Ukraine and a rise of Russian influence. In fact, the Soviet Union systematically would replace Ukrainian leaders with their own Russian authority figures who would, of course, back up whatever government happened to be in power at that time. There were even attempts throughout the years of the Soviet Union to just straight up erase Ukrainian culture and heritage. Now, this is part of why you hear Vladimir Putin saying that Ukraine and Russia have a shared history, that they were one people, they're one nation. Obviously, there has been a ton of overlap in their histories and in their people, but that hasn't always been because of Ukraine agreeing to it. So it's definitely a distorted version of their history. Now, many people know that in 1986, there was an infamous accident at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which, again, you've probably heard about in history class. And according to Britannica.com, agricultural lands near Chernobyl will be unsafe for thousands of years. That's how damaging that accident was. And, of course, Chernobyl is there in Ukraine. Now, when the Soviet Union began to fall apart in the early 90s, the legislature of the Soviet Social Republic of Ukraine, which is what it was known as at that time, they declared the nation's sovereignty on July 16th, 1990. And then they declared independence on August 24th, 1991. When the USSR completely fell apart later that same year, Ukraine gained full independence and changed its name to that, just Ukraine, dropping off all of that Soviet part of their title that they had really been forced to carry for 50 plus years. After independence, the Ukrainian population increased, though Russians have continued to be the largest minority group in the country. Again, a bit of a holdover from those Soviet policies of moving Russian people into Ukraine. Other ethnic groups that can be found include Belarusians, Moldovans, Bulgarians, Poles, Hungarians, Romanians, Roma people, basically just all of the countries that are around Ukraine. You can find people groups living there. Now, the country went through a long economic recession after they gained independence, but around 1996, their economy started to stabilize a bit, and then we're going to fast forward a bit to 2014. Former pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted by the Ukrainian people, and that helped spur on what became the Russian annexation of Crimea that happened that year. There is a really great documentary on Netflix called Winter on Fire that I encourage everyone to go watch if you haven't seen it. I think it gives a lot of great context to what's currently happening, and it can help you get caught up on some of the events in the past decade that have really helped set the stage for the current conflict. But that's, again, very much an abbreviated history of Ukraine. There's so much more that you could talk about, but again, I'll leave that up to slightly more qualified people. So let's talk about the Olympics. Let's talk about Ukraine's involvement there and some of their athletes. There's been some really great ones come from Ukraine. So during the early era of the modern Olympic Games, so from the years of 1896 to 1912, you would sometimes see athletes of Ukrainian heritage at the Olympics, but representing other countries because they didn't have an independent nation. So they might be representing Poland or the Austro-Hungarian Empire or even the Russian Empire. At 1920 Antwerp, so that's in that brief period of independence that the nation had, there is evidence of at least one Ukrainian athlete competing as part of the Czechoslovakian delegation. And from 1922 to 1936, Ukrainian athletes might end up representing Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, or even Romania. So once again, basically all the countries around modern Ukraine, since the boundaries were a bit different back then, wasn't super well established, and again, they couldn't represent their own nations, so sometimes you would find people of Ukrainian descent tagging along with some of these other countries. In 1948, there don't appear to have been any Ukrainian athletes, since this was after it was firmly established as part of the Soviet Union. Now, early on, the Soviet Union did not participate in the Olympic Games. They didn't really think it was worth their time. They didn't really see how that lined up with their policies and their agenda. That did change. So from 1952 to 1988, Ukrainian athletes represented the Soviet Union once the Soviets had decided that it was worth their time to participate in the Olympic Games, which of course became an important part of their propaganda, even played a role, obviously, in the Cold War, trying to assert their superiority over the rest of the world, essentially, and just showing how great their athletes were. So, yeah, let's talk about some specific athletes, because I don't want to stay too focused on governments and their policies. So let's talk about Larissa Latynina. She is a gymnast, or a former gymnast, and she competed in the 56 Melbourne Games, the 60 Rome Games, and the 1964 Tokyo Games, winning a total of 18 medals. And half of those, 9 of those medals, were gold. So something to think about is that women's gymnastics was still very new at this point. It was only introduced in the previous Olympiad at 1952 Helsinki. So get this. Latinina won back-to-back all-around titles in both 1956 and 1960, and she won gold for all-around team at all 3 of those games. Plus, she won all 3 golds for floor exercise, not to mention another gold for vault at the 56 games. So, I mean, just insanely talented. I do want to remind people that this was under the old scoring system. It has changed, but dare I say she was the GOAT under the old system, quite possibly. She won a total of 32 Olympic and World Championship medals combined, which is tied with Simone Biles' record. Though Biles does have more golds overall once you look at those World Championship medals. Now, her 9 golds make her second on the list of the most Olympic gold medalists, and she had the most until Michael Phelps broke her record in 2012. So to this day, she's the only woman in Olympic history to have won 9 gold medals, which is, needless to say, really amazing. She was born on December 27th, 1934 in Kherson, Ukraine, and her name at birth was Larissa Semi-Anova. I'm going to have to say that again. I'm going to struggle with this one a little bit. Larissa Semi-Anova Daria. And she was born into a poor family in Ukraine. In fact, her father, Semyon, left the family when she was 11 months old. But from what I was able to briefly research, it seems to be mostly because he was in the army. And so I don't know that he was straight up abandoning the family. It may have been one of those things where he was called up to duty when she was 11 months old. And, well, he never got back. So her mother, Pelagia, worked as a cleaner and was illiterate. Now, her father, as I mentioned, he never returned because he was killed during World War II at the Battle of Stalingrad. And I also saw some sources say that Larissa was an orphan, indicating that her mother died at some point during her childhood too, but I couldn't find a specific reason, whether that was related to war or poverty or a combination of both. So we don't know exactly what happened there. But Latineva started off doing ballet at the age of 11, and then she switched over to gymnastics when her teachers thought that she would excel at it, which it turns out they were very right about that. By the age of 16, she was the national champion of the schools division in Ukraine. In 1953, she graduated high school with honors. She moved to Kiev to attend Lenin Polytechnic Institute. Oh, and by the way, get this. She was 4 months pregnant with her daughter Tatiana when she won 5 gold medals, including the all-around title at the 1958 World Championships that were held in Moscow. She'd actually kept her pregnancy a secret from everyone, including her own coach. So I don't know what to say about that other than just she's badass. She retired after the 1966 World Championships in Dortmund, and she became a coach for the Soviet national gymnastics team. And she was in that role until 1977. Under her coaching, the women's gymnastics team won gold in 1968, 1972, and 1976. And she was also in charge of organizing the gymnastics competition for the 1980 Moscow Games. So, long history in gymnastics and great influence in that sport. She received the Olympic Order Silver Medal from the IOC in 1989, and she was inducted into the International Gymnastics Hall of Fame in 1998. And as of the recording of this episode, she is still alive and seems to be following gymnastics news to this day, even though I think she stays at home most of the time. Now, gymnastics obviously has been an area that Ukrainian athletes have excelled in, as her story shows. So we're also going to talk about men's gymnastics a little bit, and I want to talk specifically about Boris Shokhlin, who was born in Siberian Russia on January 27th, 1932, but he later settled in Ukraine, and he is recognized as Ukrainian. He is tied for third among all-time Olympic medalists across all sports, which is really cool. He was orphaned at the age of 12 and raised by his grandmother. He was unusually tall for a gymnast, and he had a knack for displaying steely determination and calm consistency when he performed. So he was given the nickname Man of Iron. So no, not Iron Man, but a real-life Man of Iron. Like Latinina, he also competed at the Melbourne Games, the Rome Games, the Tokyo Games, winning the all-around gold there at Rome. And during his Olympic stint, he won a total of 7 gold medals, 4 silvers, and 2 bronzes across, again, all of those games. He retired from competition at the age of 35 after he actually had a heart attack. But he did continue to be involved in the gymnastics world until 1992. And during the 90s and the early 2000s, he was serving as a senior lecturer on gymnastics at the University of Kiev's National University of Physical Training and Sports. So again, even though he wasn't actively involved in coaching or competing, he continued to teach about gymnastics. Now, he was inducted into the International Gymnastics Hall of Fame in 2002, and then he passed away on May 30th, 2008. Though I also found a source that said he passed away on May 27th, so there's a little bit of confusion there. Either way, May 2008 is when he left this world. Before his death, though, he and his wife established the Boris Shokhlin Foundation to help out other Ukrainian gymnasts. So his legacy continues through that foundation. It's also worth mentioning, during the Soviet years, a weightlifter by the name of Leonid Ayavanovic Zapotinsky, and he set 19 world records in the super heavyweight category, and he won gold medals at both the 1964 Tokyo Games and the 1968 Mexico City Games. He was born in Uspenka, Ukraine, into a Cossack family on January 28, 1938. And then he died a few years back, January 14th, 2016, in sorry, I'm going to have to say that one again, too. Zaporozhye, Ukraine. Now, cool thing about Leonid was that he was actually the flag bearer for the Soviet Union at the 1968 Mexico City Games, carrying in the flag one-handed when all of the other flag bearers used 2 hands. So, yeah, he was beefy to say the least. He also graduated from the Kharkiv Pedagogical Institute, and in 1970, he earned a PhD. Fun fact about him is that he apparently was Arnold Schwarzenegger's idol back when Schwarzenegger was a teen. So, again, he was an influence for a lot of other athletes around the world. Then, moving over to athletics, you've got Valerie Borzoff, who was a sprinter, and also he was the former president of the National Olympic Committee of Ukraine, serving in that role from 1991 to 1998. During the 1972 Munich Games, he won gold in both the 100-meter and the 200-meter sprints. He was born October 20th, 1949, in Sambor, Ukraine, and he started his track career in 1968, becoming a household name after the 1971 European Championships that were held in Helsinki. In total, he won 2 golds and a silver at Munich, and then he added 2 bronzes to that in 1976 Montreal. So yeah, definitely they had some strong athletes in running as well throughout the years, but he is definitely probably the most famous of their sprinters. Now, I've mentioned this on a previous episode. You guys know that I love space stuff, so this is really cool to me. A picture of Valerie Borzov winning the 200-meter heats from the 1972 games was selected for the Voyager Golden Record, which was launched into space in 1977. If you've never heard of the Golden Record for the Voyager spacecraft, essentially it was kind of like a collection of items that were sent up into space to represent humankind. So there were a lot of things that were included in that, almost kind of like a time capsule. And the idea was that it would just be floating around in space, and I guess if someone finds it in the future, they'll have a record of what humankind was like during that era. So yeah, there's a picture of him floating around space somewhere. Also, in that same year, 1977, he married Ludmila Torasheva, and she, we're going to talk about her a little bit too. She was the 1972 Munich Games all-around women's gymnastics champion. So again, lots of gymnasts here. So Ludmila, she was born in Russia, but she became a coach for Ukraine, and her hometown is now Kiev. So she won 4 golds and 9 medals total between 1968, 1972, and 1976. She was a part of that gold medal winning team with Latinina, so they competed together for a while. Also, speaking of Ludmila, this is a really cool story about her demeanor as an athlete. So at the 1975 World Cup that was held at Wembley Stadium in London, she was doing her uneven bars routine. As she did her dismount, there was a broken hook that was holding the support cables for the uneven bars, and on her dismount, it apparently finally came apart, and it caused the apparatus to crash behind her. She saluted the judges, and she walked right off the mat without turning around to look at the destruction behind her. Just, another day at the office kind of mentality. I'm hoping there's a video of that somewhere. I kind of doubt there is, and I haven't had a chance to try to track one down. So if you find one, please send it to us. We'd love to see it. But multiple sources talk about this story, so I think it's pretty awesome. Anyway, she went on to win the all-around title at that specific event. She's also one of only 2 women to win 4 gold medals at a single world championships. The other is, you guessed it, Simone Biles, who broke her record in 2019. Now, okay, let's get back to Valeri. We kind of sidetracked there a little bit with his wife because she's awesome. But back to Valerie Borzov. Due to an injury, he retired from running in 1979, and then he gave up on trying to get to a 3rd Olympic Games. Again, because of that injury. I'm sure if he could have done anything to get back to the Olympics, he would have done it. So after retiring from running, he ended up having a political career. So from 1998 until 2006, he was a member of Ukrainian parliament. So again, having an influence outside of the world of sports and being a history maker in a different way. Now, if you want to read up more about some other prominent Ukrainian athletes, because that's all I'm covering here on today's episode, is just these few. But if you want to read about some more during the Soviet era, then Wikipedia has made it super easy by having a block just for the most successful athletes. And again, we'll have that link in the show notes for you. So anyway, let's get back to Ukraine's history a little bit and talking about them competing independently after the Soviet Union. So the National Olympic Committee of Ukraine was created in 1990, but they were not recognized by the IOC yet. So in 1992, at the Barcelona Games, Ukrainians competed as part of the unified team, which again was made up of individuals from all of the former Soviet Union members. So on that team, Tatiana Gutsu won the all-around gold at 1992 Barcelona. In fact, she came away from those games with 2 gold medals, including the team gold, a silver in uneven bars, and a bronze in floor. She had a reputation for being able to perform some of the most difficult routines, so obviously that definitely helped her out with the judges. Now, the National Olympic Committee of Ukraine was finally recognized by the IOC in 1993 so that they could send athletes under their own flag. So, finally, Ukraine first participated as an independent nation in 1994 Lillehammer, and they have been to every summer and winter games ever since. Their first gold medalist as an independent nation was Oksana Bayul, who won gold in women's singles figure skating in 1994 Lillehammer. So since gaining their independence, they've been very successful. They've won a total of 148 medals since then, 38 gold, 38 silver, and 72 bronze. In the Summer Games, they've been known for doing really well in gymnastics. Not that that should be surprising at this point, based on what we've already talked about. And in the Winter Games, they're consistently strong in biathlon. So at the Lillehammer Games, they sent 37 athletes, and they came away with 2 medals, a gold and a bronze. In fact, the first independent Ukrainian gold medalist, as I already mentioned, was Oksana Bayul, and she won women's singles figure skating again. Like I said, my notes for this are not my best, so I apologize for repeating that fact. But it's still an interesting fact. You just get it twice now. At the 1996 Atlanta Games, so those were the first summer games that they were able to participate in as an independent nation. Gymnast Lilia Podcov Paivia, I think that's how you say it, Podkopayeva. Sorry, yeah, Lilia Podkopayeva. She was the all-around champion, and she also won gold in floor exercise and silver in balance beam. Of course, if you're from the U.S., most of us, when we think of 1996 Atlanta Games, we're just so focused on the Magnificent Seven winning gold in the team event that we've kind of forgotten about Lilia, which isn't really fair to her. So I want to make sure we give her a shout out for an incredible accomplishment at those games, winning the all-around gold medal. And Ukraine has also had some success in swimming, especially thanks to Yana Klitschkova, who won 4 golds between the 2000 Sydney and the 2004 Athens Games. In fact, she also has a silver, so her 5 medals make her the most decorated Ukrainian Olympian during their independent era. She has a really fun nickname, which is Goldfish, and she retired from competing in 2009. And I thought this was so fun, but at her final event ever she was presented with a live goldfish in honor of her nickname. And I think that's, I don't know, it's really kind of sweet that the people loved her so much. They wanted to honor her with her own goldfish. In 2004, she was given the Hero of Ukraine medal by former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. While Ukraine hasn't been quite as successful in the Winter Games, like I said, they do at least have a bit of a track record with biathlon. So I still want to give a shout out to a couple of their achievements there in the Winter Games. In 2014 in Sochi, the women's biathlon relay won gold. And in 2018 Pyeongchang, Alexander Abraменko won gold in men's aerials freestyle skiing. And if you got the chance to watch 2022 Beijing Games, he won silver in that same event. So, I haven't heard what's going on with him. We definitely hope he is safe if he is still at home in Ukraine. I hope we will be able to see him in 2026 because he's very, very gifted. And if you've never watched men's aerials freestyle skiing, it is a ton of fun to watch. So definitely go check out some of the videos of him doing it. Now let's switch over to the Paralympics. So for the Paralympics, Ukrainian athletes first competed for the Soviet Union delegation in 1988. And then they competed as part of the unified team at 1992 Barcelona. Ukraine made their independent Paralympic debut at 1996 Atlanta, with Vasil Lishinsky winning the nation's first Paralympic gold medal in shot put. And they also came away from those games with 4 silvers and a bronze. So, honestly, that's a pretty great debut for a brand new country in the Paralympic Games. But get this. This is a ton of fun. So, they increased their medal haul 4 years later in Sydney 2000 to 37 medals. That's pretty awesome. Then they increased it to 55 at Athens, and then they increased it to 74 in Beijing 2008. So, yeah, Ukraine's become a real powerhouse in the Summer Paralympics, and overall, they have the greatest success in swimming and athletics for the Summer Paralympic Games. For the Winter Games, they were not able to get a delegation put together in time for 1994 Lillehammer, so their debut ended up being at 1998 Nagano. Overall, they've had incredible success at the Paralympics, both summer and winter. They've won a total of 176 golds, 203 silvers, and 205 bronzes. I mean, we just finished the Paralympic Games for Beijing 2022, and they kicked ass there. They did amazing, especially considering the stress that they had to be under, being worried about friends and family back home and hearing news about, destruction in their hometowns. Like, it's just amazing what they pulled off in 2022. Anyway, they consistently dominate in biathlon and cross-country skiing events. A big part of their Paralympic success is due to the work of Valeri Shushkevich, who is a former disabled swimmer, and he went into politics and was elected as a member of the Ukrainian parliament. So get this. And I'm just going to read this the way that it is on Wikipedia, because I thought the writing was pretty good in this situation. So he's been credited with kickstarting the Paralympic movement in the country. He helped establish a National Paralympic Center in 2002, and he ensured that Ukrainian Paralympians were granted a specific budget. That's huge. I don't know how else to say how big that is, because a lot of countries don't give a specific budget for their Paralympians. A lot of times well, here, I've got a quote on it that'll say it better than I can. Here we go. Okay, so sports official Karina Matias, she said that Ukraine's biggest achievement, we have separate budgets for the Olympics and the Paralympics, whereas most other countries just get whatever bits and pieces are left over from their Olympic budget. Again, that's huge that Ukraine cares about their Paralympians and wants them to hold equal status to their Olympians and to get the resources and, frankly, the attention that they deserve for all of their hard work. Four-time Paralympic swimming champion Maxim Vereksa described Shushkevich as a father figure concerned with each and every athlete. So, I mean, just he has an incredible impact there in the country and has really spoken up for Paralympians and for promoting adaptive sports in their country. And I think a lot of us could learn from his example. So hats off to Valeri Shushkevich. Anyway, moving on. New Disability magazine once noted that Ukraine is the only country that consistently ranks high in both the summer and the winter Paralympics. So their point being that most countries either do really well in summer or they do really well in winter. But Ukraine has consistent performance across both. And again, I think that speaks a lot for the impact of Shushkevich and the program that he has helped build there. Now, Ukraine's most decorated Paralympian so far has been Viktor Smirnov. At the 2004 Athens Paralympics, he won 5 gold medals, a silver, and a bronze in swimming. That was in disability category 11. So in total, he's won 6 gold medals, 3 silvers, and 5 bronzes across the 2004, 2008, and 2012 Paralympic Games. That's, again, I wish we could talk about everyone, but there's only so much time, and that would take away the fun of you getting to go and look up some more of their amazing Olympians and Paralympians. I want to kind of end this episode talking quickly a little bit about some of the athletes who have been responding to the call of duty there in Ukraine and are helping fight for their country right now. So I want to give, a shout out to Olympic bronze medalist in karate, Stanislav Horuna. He's one of the most visible Ukrainian Olympians, and he has joined the military to help fight for his country. So, you know what? If you're a praying person or you believe in good thoughts, good vibes, whatever, definitely send them his way. I hope we get to see him again because he's a great athlete. Then also have to mention the Klitschko brothers, who are both professional boxers. So if you've heard that name recently, Vitaly Klitschko is the mayor of Kiev, and his brother, Vladimir, won the gold medal in super heavyweight category for boxing in Atlanta 1996. And I've read that Vitaly was originally supposed to go to those games, and it appears like there may have been an issue with, possible doping, something like that. I don't know the details of all of that. Regardless, he wasn't able to go to 1996. But his brother went and won the gold medal. But anyway, they have teamed up together. They are both there in the country. They are doing an incredible job rallying the troops and motivating people, keeping morale up, fighting themselves. And, again, as former professional boxers, I don't think that should shock anyone that they are fighting for their country. And I'm sure that there are others who have joined the cause that we just don't know about because, there's only so much information that we can get right now about athletes. I did read a story the other day, and I apologize, I don't have the name here because I forgot to save it. But I did read a story the other day about a Ukrainian long-distance runner, a marathoner, I believe, who was in a race in Kenya, and then he heard about his home city being attacked. And, I don't know if he made it back there to be able to help out or not. There hasn't been an update on that. Again, I apologize. I don't have his name. I'm sorry. I was not prepared for that. But I'm sure there are other Olympians who are helping. And as far as Paralympians go, of course, there was just the team that was competing in Beijing while the war was going on. It is a miracle that they were able to get out of the country to be able to compete. And it was just so moving to hear from their delegation that it was important for them to be at the Paralympic Games because they wanted there to be that visibility. And again, I don't have the exact quote, but I remember reading something to the extent of, if we don't attend, it's like Ukraine doesn't exist. And we want to be here to say that we exist. It was something along those lines. I might be butchering the quote, but the IOC did release a statement that they are helping the athletes get somewhere safe, but obviously for their safety, they are not revealing where they are going. So, wherever they are, we hope that the Paralympians are safe and that they are able to be reunited with family soon. And again, our hearts and our minds have just been heavy with Ukraine and just the news and just hearing about the loss of life and what's happening. So, definitely they could use all the love that that we can send their way. So there's a number of organizations that are supporting the effort there and helping people out. One that I want to give a shout out to, just because I've donated to them personally, is Project C.U.R.E. But they send medical supplies into areas undergoing crisis. And so I felt like, at least for me, I felt like that was a good cause to support since they are active in Ukraine right now. So go check out projectcure.org. And again, there's other organizations that are also supporting work over there, but I know they could use some love right now. Anyway, I know this has been a very different episode from what we normally do, and it's kind of a little bit of a downer to some degree, but I hope it's also been inspirational. And again, I want to make sure that on this podcast, we're not just talking about the U.S. and U.S. athletes. The Olympic movement was started to bring the world together and for us to learn each other's stories and for us to be able to get a sense of what peace could look like. It's an ideal for sure. We don't live in a perfect world. I know we may never attain that ideal, but that's why the Olympics and the Paralympics are so important, because they remind us of what humans are capable of when we are determined and when we work together and when we have a healthy competition with each other that pushes us to be our absolute best. We hope that the war ends soon, and we hope that there's no more destruction or loss of life. We hope that all these Olympians and Paralympians are safe. And for now, I hope that all of you listening are safe as well. And just a quick reminder that we are stronger together. The Games Odyssey podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media, LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.